Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second episode of the week of Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
And returning from our earlier episode this week,
I'm Bailey.
Thanks for being here. Last week we called you out and said you hadn't been on one yet, and so thanks for making the drive out and joining us. Whole 10 minutes.
we are 40 episodes deep.
Oh my gosh.
This
aren't
is
we
episode
really?
41.
Wow.
So what are we doing? What are we doing special for
And-
episode 50? That's my question.
Well, we'll have to think about this later.
Yeah, because we need to get there at some point.
True.
We
It's
don't
true.
know if we'll be around that long.
Yeah, this could be the last
10 more
one.
sounds like a little, but
Well, 10, and then you kind of just divide by 2 for the week, so like 5 more weeks. And then
Yeah.
we'll be at episode 50.
yeah.
Which is actually surprising because of the amount of community outreach that we've done with this kind of podcast. That being said, our topic for today is the same as it was on Tuesday, which is community outreach in the church.
It's true. And actually, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's listening because we are actually in 14 states now. Which is really super cool. So thank you for listening, wherever you're listening from.
We are
it's
spreading.
cool to know. Okay, that was creepy.
I want to say it is surprising how we are spreading, though. Because we end up popping up in more states, like, separately kind of thing. But not, like, all that many more people kind of thing. Does that make sense? It's kind of weird. So, like, we're 100% spreading because, like, you guys as listeners are making, like, phone calls to friends and families and, like, that kind of a thing who are, like, in different states and that kind of thing. And they're tuning in for, like, an episode or two or, you know, sticking with it kind of thing. And I kind of want to just thank everybody who's, you know, kind of joined the Church of Stupid community.
Yeah, thanks for being a
Absolutely.
part. It's been really fun to watch, and we do appreciate you listening. At least I do.
We don't deserve it.
We don't
we are
deserve
very
it. We know.
thankful.
We know we don't. But
I'd like to say we're trying our best, but sometimes I don't know if I'm even trying my best.
well, I think part of our heart though when we created this podcast was very intentionally community outreach.
Yeah.
We wanted
Yeah.
we recognized the need from the community, and we had conversations in particular with non-Christians, with people who
Yeah.
live outside of, like, some Christians who don't go to church anymore, and really intentionally explored what was it that made you leave, or what don't you like about church, or what do you think would be cool
Yeah.
for church to do, and from all of these things that we kind of came together and built this weird podcast where we talk about all of these issues that aren't just coming from things that we personally have experienced, but things that maybe some of our friends have.
And then we also have, you know, the internet to thank for some of these ideas.
Internet! Google does me good.
Google does great.
Thank
But
you, Pew Research.
Like, this is one of those, like, great examples of, and I'm tooting our own horn when I say great examples of something that, like, is done as a form of community outreach. Like, it's one of, like, the better ends of things. And, like, we've been looking at some other ideas for what it would mean to successfully reach into our community and to be real members of our community. And Ruth, you've had some ideas on what that would look like. So what do you have?
Oh, geez. What do I have? This is a
What
lot
you
of
got?
pressure. One thing, like a couple of things that we've been looking at, and I think the key is there's not a 1, 2, 3 answer. It's never going to look the same because communities don't look the same. And that's one thing churches do really, really poorly is they just assume because it worked in one community, it's going to work in all of them.
Amen.
And it just doesn't work that way ever. But Bailey and Kate, who was on last week, had a great idea of doing a cooking class for college students.
Yeah.
Here, which is
I
one thing
can
we're
name
looking at
several people that
doing.
need that.
We've also intentionally, so this podcast was born out of a group of people who work or are affiliated at Midland First, who sat down to talk about what type of worship service would actually be like what could you invest in, what would be interesting, and what would help, like, because I think a lot of us have some past where we have either have felt hurt by the church or where we have seen the church hurt other people. And so we started looking at what does it look like to start to try to counteract that. And we created this whole podcast idea that was centered, this service idea that was centered around not being in the church, but it being in a building that's primarily used for something else. In my perfect world, that would look like a mission center of some sort that church also happens to be at. And they're going into different communities, working with structures that already exist to help be a presence in the community, serve the community in the best way they can. So I don't know. I'm trying to think now. You put me on the spot.
Well, I think also one of like the successful things that we see inside of a church, especially inside of Midland, like we have a great example of this, is the creation of like the church coffee shop thing. And again, it's not a one solution fits all community kind of thing. You may have a community that's not filled with coffee drinkers or whatever.
I don't drink coffee, so.
Our entire generation, like either you are completely addicted to coffee or you don't touch this stuff. And I find that hilarious.
That's fair.
Not the point. But it's one of these things that like encourages community like within its actual like doors, but it also like encourages you to, hey, we have coffee, something that you use on a normal daily basis. Like it's filling a service that a community could either need because, hey, you don't have a Starbucks, or hey, Starbucks is too expensive for you to like get your morning coffee kind of thing at. But I think that's one of those like prime examples that a lot of churches like look at and has been fairly successful when it comes to like the actual community outreach part of things.
Absolutely. Well, and I love churches that are taking steps. There's a program over in the Macomb area of Michigan called McRest. I don't know if you've heard of it. But
Sounds
I know
way too
it's
similar to the McRib.
I
but
know.
Okay.
And it provide like different churches will host a group of homeless men in their church for a week, and it travels around to different churches. There's transportation provided, laundry provided, all sorts of different ways for your church to provide for these people. Like literally, they will have people whose job is to wash the laundry of these people. And I think it's a really cool program. And there's also programs that are designed around intentionally giving people skills for job seeking. So training up people. I love ESL. I wish that was the reverse as well. I wish that I could take a course to learn like Spanish or French or anything, because I think that the church should be more active in trying to reach people where they are as well. But I like seeing those types of services as well. The ones where it's not about necessarily like the coffee shops are great.
Yeah.
And I think they're fun. I just get hot chocolate in them. But I also think realistically that's not necessarily serving the people who need it. It is good community outreach, but it's not necessarily serving the people who need it.
Yeah. And
so I like to see those types of things supplemented as well with these types of other programs. But not all community outreach is missions, and not all missions is community outreach. I think those can be different entities.
Yeah, that's a hard thing for a lot of churches to separate.
Well, for me, it's now. Here's the thing: some coffee shops that are designed by Christian organizations are run by people, like for instance, who have gotten out of prison and need jobs, or veterans, or anybody who is in need of a job but can't necessarily or doesn't find one easily. Some of them intentionally serve those kinds of people. However, not all of them do. And the ones that don't, but really are more about having a presence in the community, that's not really necessarily a mission. That's a community outreach. Now, if you're intentionally, again, like I said, there are ways you can do it to make it a mission. But I think that we need to separate those things in our heads sometimes. They can go together and work together, but just because you make a coffee shop in your community doesn't mean you're actually doing mission work.
Yeah.
it also doesn't mean as much that you're benefiting the community. You could just literally be making a coffee shop, which is a whole nother
Yeah.
subject to
Sorry,
talk about,
I know that those were probably two different things, and I probably didn't need to address them. But
it comes to this like idea of effectiveness. Like you actually have to like look at your community and see how effective something is going to be there, because there are certain times where something is going to maybe either have a negative impact on your community, or it's just going to sit there for a couple of months and then be vacated because it doesn't work or something like that.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we skip out a lot on, is that checking to be like, hey, is this actually something that's going to work inside of my community? And I know like a prime example of this is East Lansing, where I attended MSU at. There are a lot of businesses that like open and close every single year because they aren't what students are like looking for and all this kind of stuff. And people always assume, oh, students are looking for trying to think of an exact one.
Internet cafes. They're always looking for internet cafes,
always
right?
looking for internet cafes.
Just desperate for them.
Yeah, but if you open up one internet cafe in a place where there's already 40 internet cafes, what's that doing for anybody?
Just go to a Cold Stone with free Wi-Fi, man. You get ice cream, man. And okay, whatever. You can tell how I spent my college years.
Hey, ice cream is not a bad thing, but we were kind of talking, and it's a little bit goofing off. Like the mass like negative community outreach like is like a real thing, and we've seen this in the form of like cult churches and such that like pop up around America and that kind of a thing. And those have that community aspect, and those have that like mass draw to them, but they're also completely lying to the community. And that is completely damaging.
Or harming the community.
Yeah.
Maybe not always lying. Sometimes they're saying exactly what they think, but it's not good.
So
Sorry, just gotta clear.
how do we properly move into a community without causing damage, causing harm, without furthering the distance between the community and the church, without all of that kind of stuff? And like, I'm opening this to you, but I'm also curious as to Bailey, because no offense, Bailey, you're not somebody who's fully grown up with this entire pastor complex looking down on you kind of thing. Like, and I guess also to you, Elijah, but like we've grown up being kids of pastors and that kind of a thing. And I think at least for me, that's made it so that I'm a little bit more open about talking about my faith, because it was like just a basic kind of thing. But when like you actually look into the community and you look into a church going into a community, what's the first step that the church should take?
I mean, I think we talked about it kind of last episode, is you need to figure out what the community wants. Like, you can have all these great ideas, but if they aren't actually going to help your community, like, you can launch them and no one will come to them. So I think the first step in any business, well, like any venture that you go into, like I'm a business major, so like you have to find your target market and like make sure that your target market actually wants your product. Like, you have to design your product to reach your target market. So for me, it's like you have to find a niche to go into to be successful.
Yeah.
And if your target is this of avoidance of harm, then do you, I guess that, I know it's like difficult to like say one universal, like the person who you like go to kind of thing. But like if you're looking at a community and you see strong powers, like the powers that be inside of a community, and be either this is an extreme example, but I think about like a biker gang being like, which is like, you know, maybe the negative aspect of power in a community, but like a church having to preach to a community that is overrun by a biker gang. How do you go in there and help the community without causing harm to everyone involved? Does that make sense? I feel like that's like a really stupid scenario to come up with, but I also think it's like kind of relevant because even if it's not a biker gang or something like
Yeah.
that, you do have the powers that be in a community. And like your goal is to not, I mean, your goal may be to upset the powers that be in a community, but like as a church, like you're trying to go in with causing the least amount of harm to do the most amount of good. Is that like a proper?
Yeah, I'm having a tough time trying to.
Connect my thoughts together.
No, it's not connecting your thoughts as much as it's connecting your examples with like
A solution.
reality.
Yeah, right, yeah, that's fair too.
I mean, because at the end of the day, okay, right now we're in the community of the city of Midland. What are the powers that be in Midland?
I have no idea. As
Yeah,
somebody
that's
who's
the
not
thing.
been here for long,
Yeah, I don't know
I
either.
mean, I would say we are what I would like to call a corporation town.
mhm.
We
So Dow.
we exist pretty much because of Dow Chemical.
Fair enough.
Like,
Yeah.
there may be some listeners who live in Midland, I feel like, who may disagree, but I always feel like the town has existed because of Dow Chemical. Like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but that's most towns. Most towns existed because there was an industry that
Yeah.
is there. So
Is
I
or
mean,
was right.
yeah, is or was.
Oops, excuse me.
So it's like
Every week.
you have to find a way to, I guess, partner maybe with the powers that be. Like, I don't know. I feel like at least at this church, like, we have a lot of insider help.
Yeah, because
I
our
would-
church was, built by Dow and
Yeah.
like, all this stuff. Like it was built around this whole like actual
Yeah. It
Dow,
was,
and so we have that like original running track kind of thing that builds us up.
yeah, but
I
I always wonder, like, I had a friend when I was in college. He was a church planter. Like, he started a church in the town where I went to school. And it was always interesting because for him, it was, he made a bunch of relationships, like, outside, like, he made a bunch of relationships, like, outside of the church building because he didn't really have a church building.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, so they were able to, he used his relationship building skills to create kind of a church, which was interesting. So, because we have two campuses, like two colleges where I went to, in the town where I went to school. So he would like spend pretty much every other day either at my campus or at a different one. And he like built relationship with a bunch of college students. And community members. So it ended
Yeah.
up being a church where it was a lot of like younger people in the church and community members. And it was like kind of a small group. It was kind of like we talked about family churches on one of the episodes in the podcast. It was kind of like a family church, but it was like a neighborhood church. That's literally what's the name of the church. It was a neighborhood church. So
Okay.
he went into this neighborhood and kind of built a church community around it, which I thought was interesting. So you have to be able to create relationships within your town, I guess would be a goal of how not to cause harm in your town where you're attempting to make a church.
Right. Maybe like having a focus on
People first.
immersing yourself in a community and building relationships with people instead of planting a flag in the midst of strangers and trying to like indoctrinate,
Yeah.
sort of a thing.
Which at one point was, what the church is known for.
I
I was
mean,
gonna say there's
globally,
actually,
yeah.
there's a lot of problems with the church has not done great at finding that balance. We
Right.
find a lot of missionary movements that were linked to colonization.
Yeah, I was gonna say, look at
and it
how
has
the church
caused
handled Africa. Like,
a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
it caused a lot of harm. Unintentionally, I think, in most cases, or I want to hope in most cases, maybe is a better way
Well,
to say that.
sometimes-
that has to be a clarification.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I-
sometimes
we
you
don't
have to
always
kind of separate the individuals who maybe
but
were
I-
a part of things and the people who like made it happen. I don't know.
I think, especially now in our context, which is, Michigan in the United States of America, there's churches everywhere, right? You're not probably going to walk into a community in the States that hasn't heard of what church is. That doesn't mean there's nobody who hasn't heard, like, you know what I mean? And that doesn't mean it's effective or ineffective, but people tend to know what church is. I think that that's a pretty fair statement.
I would agree.
And so I think now what we're dealing with is that in our communities, it's not that we don't have a presence, it's that we don't necessarily have a good presence. And there's a lot of long-term hurt that has gone unacknowledged. And so now we're working from that frame. Is that you're looking at me like I'm either crazy or like you agree or like you want to yell at me?
I agree.
Okay, I'm like, I don't know if you want to yell at me or...
My negative tone of frame is definitely lower when I'm looking at
That's
you.
true. That's true. You do tend to... but I think that that's sort of... I do love hearing the story of the building relationships, especially in regards to like a new church in a community, not just churches that are already established. But I think that for us... It really involves actively pursuing ways to undo harm that has been done, or actively seeking to keep the connections that are already there strong and to build upon them. Because I don't think every community has had a church that negatively impacted them. I don't think that's a fair statement either.
Yeah.
I think that there are some that have done it really well. And I think even churches that have caused harm might have done it really well at some point. But it's how do you build on the good and acknowledge the bad? So I think it comes down to really knowing the people. You have to know the community. You have to be willing, know what's going on. One thing we're doing here at our church is we're partnered with the Midland Center for the Arts on their ongoing art project at the Center for the Arts of What's Certain About Uncertainty, which is artist representations of what has gone on, their pain from the past year and a half, 2 years, from COVID, from the protests, from all of that stuff. And just, I think it's starting to do things like that, where we reached out to the art center and we're like, hey, we thought about doing this. What do you guys think? And they said, well, we already have a project, so would you like to join? And now that art show is traveling from the art center to 3 different local churches, include one of them being our own. And I think that stuff, it might seem small, but it's a start.
Yeah.
It's a start, because that's a big feature, especially here in Midland. The Midland Center for the Arts is huge. Before I ever moved to Midland, I came to the Midland Center for the Arts to watch a show. So at least, and I live 2 hours away. So it's big enough that, I at least knew that much.
Well, congrats for knowing that much.
Thank you. I knew some things.
Part of that, I think, also really involves this, like the idea of, if we're talking about something that might be essential when it comes to positively affecting positively affecting a community as a church, let's just say. Part of that is just like, as silly and as obvious as this may sound, part of that is just learning to view people as people and not view people as
Mission opportunities or resources.
Yeah, exactly. Mission opportunities or resources or believers or non-believers. Going into community you think is particularly a rebellious or bad community versus a nice and upstanding community, sort of a thing, like where you then put labels on people like that and like not even necessarily adjust your mission work accordingly, but adjust the way you view them as people accordingly. Because I think a lot of times people are really just sort of viewed as numbers.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, some people are viewed as like, I don't know. I just see some missions like that are missions that are not designed to like help people through like the things that they're actually going through necessarily,
but are more just to bolster numbers or like
bolster numbers or like minister to people that the church thinks needs it more than others, but not really in a way that's helpful. In a way that's like, oh, this community has a large group of people who aren't Christian.
Yep.
They need to be preached to more than this, and that's mission. That's what a mission is, and that's what reaching our community is going into a group that we view that we look at as less than us because they're not part of our church. Therefore, like, you know, we need, I don't know. I'm sort of pulling from a specific example. I'll just say it. There was a church that I knew who had this idea for a mission, which was to go specifically into an area of the state that had a large Muslim community. And their idea of ministering to these people and I guess probably their way of going out into their community was to go specifically into an area that was, you know, that had a high Muslim population and to sing Christmas carols to them on their doorsteps. Which on its own, you could probably figure out a way to justify and say that maybe some of the people really did have good intentions. But when, as a church, your idea for helping your community, helping human beings, helping people, is to go into an area specifically that you know doesn't have a lot of people who share your faith, to then go and just like show them or like basically expose them to what your faith is, and then you call it ministry and you call it helping people. Like, I just don't think at that point that you're really treating them as like
people,
normal people. You're treating them as like people that need to be fixed or exposed to the right thing. And I don't think that's ministry, or at least good ministry. And I don't think that's an example of what serving a community is. And I don't want to end it on just a note like that's not what to do and have it be all negative. But if I'm trying to think of examples of of ministry, or even just examples of churches of reaching their community and providing really, really, really well, it's hard to not think of examples that are sort of the opposite of that.
Well,
And if any of you have an example of maybe like a mirror side of that example, I would love to hear it, because unfortunately that's like some of the things I was exposed to when I was a little younger, was sort of that.
I think as we close out our time, it's important to say that it's absolutely necessary that we have these hard conversations, though, that we look at those things.
Yeah.
I want to encourage anybody who's listening, because I have seen, believe it or not, I have seen things come out of this podcast that have inspired my friends or people I know, or people maybe I don't know, that maybe it inspired them too, to have some of these conversations with their church, which literally is the biggest compliment I could ever get. So like, thank you guys. But my encouragement to you is to have those hard conversations in the church buildings. Talk about how the community perceives those things. And it's exhausting. I think all of us at this table right now have been exhausted from trying our best to help the church see the ways that it has been harming people, or how its community outreach maybe isn't necessarily community outreach as much as it is patting ourselves on the back, or all of those things. But there are so many people who want to do real community outreach.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people who need it.
And Christ wants to be a part of everyone's life. You know, God wants to be involved in everybody's life, and I wish I could say that they will listen to you the first time.
Never.
They're not going to, and sometimes it feels like even in our own experiences that we keep hitting walls. But it's so important that people with a passion for this kind of thing speak up and speak out. And so find the right way to do it. And if you don't have all the answers, that's awesome. You've learned one more thing that you're never going to have all the answers. But go into your communities and start to figure out what they really need, and start to build those bridges and fight the good fight. You're welcome. I had to add the keep fighting and the encouragement. You're not alone. We all love and support you. And if we can support you in any way, feel free to reach out to us wherever you can.
Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We check all of our comments that we get on anything.
It's true.
Which is seldom. But hey, we love hearing from you if you do reach out to us. For all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Comma, but
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
And I'm Bailey.
And we hope that you learn to love your neighbor this week as you love yourself, and enjoy the rest of your week.